Sure. So what we're proposing is a single system that would apply to any hazard, so an event from any hazard. So that would include conflict, it could include natural disasters, food safety incidents, chemical, radionuclear, and communicable disease hazards. So we wanted to try to get a standard approach that could apply to all hazards and have recognizable deliverables from the risk assessment so that the organization as a whole would recognize, oh, there's WHO's risk assessment, oh, there's the summary document of the risk assessment, etc. So we started with the verification of events. So we get event notifications in from many different sources, from country level, from CNN, from all sorts of formal and informal channels. And that goes through a verification process to make sure, usually through the member state, to make sure the event is real, that it happened. And then we would move to a risk assessment. And this was the component that we wanted to really get aligned across the organization and across all hazards as we come together into a single emergency program. So we've developed a document that shows a sort of step-by-step process. But the idea would be, as soon as the event is verified, a group is formed, a risk assessment group for that event is formed, and it would be made up of individuals from the emergency program. Partners might also be involved. Certainly member state colleagues would be involved, and usually a hazards specialist. So someone who knows the specific disease or who is very familiar with conflict or specific natural disasters, flood versus earthquake, etc. So we'd have a small team that's put together, and a head would be determined who would lead that group. And then they would sit together for preparatory work to decide, okay, with this hazard that we're facing, what are the main risks we're looking at? And what are the questions, the risk questions, the top risk questions for this event that we need to look at? So the group together would decide quite quickly in a meeting, what are the main risks we want to look at here? And then the risk assessment would be conducted quite rapidly. It's just an initial assessment to get a feel for what's happening in the event. And the questions then would involve issues related to the hazard itself, issues related to the exposure, is it a populated area or not, etc. How widely have people been exposed? How many people have been affected? And then the context, which would, of course, include the capacity of the health system to handle the health consequences of the event, etc. So looking at those three main areas, the hazard, the exposure, and the context, the team would then look at the different risk questions that they built, hazard-specific risk questions, and determine ultimately what we were aiming for is a score for each question that links the likelihood and the impact of each of those to measure risk, and a confidence level for each of those scores, how much confidence we have in the information available to us. And ultimately then looking at all those risk questions and the answers that come up to give a risk score to the overall event, to say if it's a low, medium, or high risk, the event. And of course this is event specific because the questions are always event specific. And then the idea is there's a single standard template to submit the results from the risk assessment, and that there's a very short 2-page summary of the scores of the risk assessment that explain how the overall risk score is determined. And then from there, a medium and high risk score would lead to WHO's grading process. A low risk score would say no grading, no emergency response may be required at this time. We can handle these risks with our regular capacities, the country office, etc.